and welcome to our WJE webinar. My name is Liz Pimper and I'll be your moderator. Our topic today is after the deadline, compliance with Chicago's high-rise fire ordinance. The deadline to comply with Chicago's high-rise building fire ordinance was December 31st, 2014. If you are installing fire sprinklers, you have until December 31st, 2016. City officials announced that no extensions will be granted and that buildings not in compliance will be referred to court. During the next hour, we will share more about the history and details of the high-rise ordinance, what you need to be doing if not already in compliance, and some guidelines on preparing your report if not already submitted. Leading our discussion today will be one of WJE's fire protection and life safety experts, Carl Baldassarra. Carl participated in the development of code requirements and the life safety evaluation system for existing high-rise buildings in Chicago under a contract with the city. Now, before we begin, I have a few logistical details to share. We are using the integrated audio feature of GoToWebinar, so you can choose between using your telephone or your computer speakers to listen to the webinar. You have automatically been muted and will remain muted during the presentation. There will be plenty of time to answer your questions at the end of the presentation, but you may submit questions at any time. If you have a question, please maximize the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Type your question in the Questions for Staff box and hit Send. We also will take live questions near the end of the hour. WJE is a registered course provider with the American Institute of Architects. You are eligible to receive 1 AIA CES credit for your participation in today's webinar. At the end of the presentation, we will show a slide with more information on how you can obtain that credit. In addition, we will make today's slides available and you can request that in an email as well. This is a copyrighted presentation. And here are your learning objectives for the day. At the end of this program, you will be able to understand the history and major requirements of the Chicago High-Rise Ordinance. You'll be able to determine what you need to be doing if not already in compliance. You can determine what to do in the event of receiving a citation from the city, and you'll understand how the ordinance may evolve in the future. And now we'll get started. Carl?
Thank you very much, Liz. Hello, I'm Carl Baldassarra, and I'm pleased that you could attend this presentation. The City of Chicago has stated that it will be conducting inspections following the deadline for completing most of the elements of the Chicago High-Rise Ordinance. We've received a number of client inquiries resulting from the city's inspections already, so we thought it would be good for us to share with you what we know about the current status of the ordinance. Here is the agenda for today's presentation. We will cover the background of the Chicago High-Rise Ordinance and its major requirements, including the life safety evaluation portion of the ordinance. We'll present a summary of the major findings from a sample of life safety evaluation surveys conducted in Chicago. We'll talk about the current status of the program, its enforcement, and what to do if a building owner or agent receives a citation for court appearance. And then we'll have some time for your questions. As you may know, the Chicago High-Rise Ordinance was adopted in 2004 following the Cook County Administration building fire that happened in October of 2003, killing 6 people. To the city, it was clear that something had to be done to improve the level of safety in its high-rise buildings, that is, buildings over 80 feet tall. Fatal fires had happened before, but this time was a bit different. A broad approach was used to balance the various interests so that safety could be improved without requiring extraordinary sums of money to be spent by building owners. Commercial buildings were required to be equipped with sprinklers over a 12-year period. At the same time, a number of code requirements were modified to reduce the cost of installing fire protection systems so as to encourage their installation on an optional basis. For residential and landmark commercial buildings, an alternative to sprinkler installations was developed. That alternative is the life safety evaluation. Clearly, hundreds of residential and historic commercial buildings have utilized the life safety evaluation option to meet the ordinance. The life safety evaluation will be a focus of this presentation today and how it relates to the next round of inspections the Department of Buildings will be doing. First, some background. The major components of the high-rise ordinance are life safety data sheets which are required to be submitted to the city so the city has a brief summary of the building's fire safety features. one-way and two-way voice communication systems, which I'll talk more about shortly, automatic sprinkler systems for commercial buildings, changes to about 10 sections of the Chicago Building Code to allow for more economical installations of fire protection features, the life safety option for residential and historic buildings so as not to have automatic sprinklers mandated for them. Smoke-proof tower equipment must now be tested annually. In fact, that system failed to operate effectively in the county building fire, and it was determined that it had not been tested in many years. And the code was clarified to require minimum 1-hour rated fire doors for stairway shafts. The ordinance has a number of milestone dates for implementation. Let's review the significant dates which are incorporated in the ordinance. So as you can see, the life safety data sheets were required to be submitted to the city prior to April 1st, 2005. Again, those sheets provide a summary of a building's fire protection features. Life safety evaluation reports were due to the city by January 1st, 2006, and any corrective work associated with the reports had to have been completed by January 1st of this year. Voice communication systems. It's interesting to note that the installation of voice communication systems was extended by 2 years because of the recession. What you see here is the latest deadline. Again, January 1st, 2015. Fire-rated stairway doors were required to have been installed by January of this year. And for automatic sprinklers, you can see that the city allowed a phased approach. And also there is almost 2 years left for the buildings to be completed. Those are the buildings that are typically the commercial buildings and those residential and landmark buildings which could not pass the life safety evaluation. Let's talk more specifically about the ordinance's major requirements. I mentioned voice communication systems earlier. 2 types of voice systems are required by the ordinance. A one-way voice system which allows the firefighters on the premises to communicate with building occupants, allowing people to have real-time information about what is happening and what they should do. What you see here in the picture is typically found in the lobby of a building. It's sometimes called a fire command panel, and it allows the fire department to send voice instructions to public areas of the building. They can select speakers on a single floor, in a single stairway, in the elevators, or to all areas of the building if they wish to do so. For example, the fire department may instruct occupants below the 25th floor to remain in their units, and they may direct people on and above the 25th floor to use the exit stairways. It depends upon the specific circumstances of the incident, and that's a good thing about receiving real-time information, what human behavior specialists call situational awareness. Researchers have found that people having good information in a fire situation will make good decisions about what to do. These are the minimum portions of the building where where speakers for the voice systems are to be located. In lobbies, corridors, stairways, elevators, and in business buildings, tenant space is more than 5,000 square feet. In some cases, even though it's not required, building owners have elected to have speakers installed in the individual dwelling units to improve the residents' ability to hear the messages. Also required by the ordinance is a two-way voice communication system. This system is intended to allow firefighters and incident commanders to communicate with one another. It's not intended for use by the public. These devices are typically telephones located within cabinets every 5th floor in the stairways, at the fire command panel, and sometimes in other locations. I should mention that the ordinance allows the elimination or substitution of existing devices for one-way and two-way voice systems in very limited circumstances. Another major element of the ordinance is that doors serving stairwell enclosures must have a minimum rating of 1 hour. This is an important safety measure to restrict fire spread vertically and to provide a safe environment for people leaving the building by the stairways. In new construction, doors have to have a higher rating, and this was intended to provide a reasonable minimum level of protection. To be effective, the doors must meet minimum standards, which is reflected by having a door certified by a testing agency, such as Underwriters Laboratories. You can usually find the label of the testing agency affixed to the hinge side of the door. It's also important that the door have a self-closing device and that it tightly latches into the door frame to keep fire and smoke out of the stairway. More about the life safety evaluation. It was 1975 when the Chicago Building Code was changed to require all new high-rise buildings to have fire safety features, which we now associate with modern fire protection. Things like rated construction, sprinklers, communication systems, enclosed means of egress, compartmentation, to name a few. The challenge was, what should be done to improve the fire safety in buildings built prior to 1975? Well, between 1975 and 2003, when the Cook County building fire occurred, the city did experience several loss of life fires in the older high-rise buildings. Each time, there was talk of sweeping code changes, including features like sprinklers, but cost consideration and practical difficulties overcame the calls for improved fire safety, and eventually interest declined. As I mentioned earlier, following this fire in Cook County building, city officials decided it was time to take a step forward in implementing minimum requirements for existing high-rise buildings, those built prior to 1975. This time a new approach was taken. The various obstacles to previous actions were considered. New and more cost-effective technology was considered. Certain changes to the code were made to make the improvements more affordable. More reasonable timeframes were developed. Interested parties were brought to the table, and recognition of a viable alternative to mandating sprinklers in hundreds of buildings was developed. That alternative was the life safety evaluation. The city set the bar for the minimum level of safety based on the requirements in Chapter 34 of the Chicago Building Code. So the life safety evaluation was designed around those requirements. The life safety evaluation is similar to evaluation systems used in other codes like the Life Safety Code, the International Building Code, and New York City's Local Law 5. The life safety evaluation is a systematic approach to evaluating a building's fire safety. Points are awarded for positive features, points are deducted for missing or incomplete features. And there is a minimum point score required for compliance. To ensure a level of competency, evaluations are to be conducted by licensed architects or engineers. And there was an estimated 850 buildings subject to the life safety evaluation in Chicago. This was intended to be a one-time analysis and does not need to be completed on a recurring basis. With such a system, there are many benefits. Remember, this is the method used to demonstrate that a building has a minimum level of safety so that a sprinkler system is not required throughout the building, saving the owners perhaps millions of dollars while still providing a reasonable level of safety. It's an objective system and it's flexible. There are separate system score sheets for residential and commercial buildings because the code requirements for each of them are different. But of course, there are some caveats with this system. We advise our clients that even if they meet the minimum score of the life safety evaluation, it's not meant to suggest it's the same level of safety as that from a sprinkler system. Loss of life, injuries, and property damage will not be prevented. Also, we advise our clients that a passing score is not intended to circumvent the minimum code requirements for existing buildings in Chapter 34, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Here's how the process has worked. A licensed architect or engineer prepares the report on behalf of the owner. The report with a passing score or with required upgrades to achieve a passing score is sent to the Department of Buildings. The reports are reviewed and either approved or rejected. If approved, the building can implement the necessary upgrades. If rejected, the report needs to be revised and resubmitted to the Department of Buildings until the report is eventually approved. The Department of Buildings will inspect buildings when upgrades are completed, or as we know now, after January 1, 2015, to confirm compliance with the ordinance. Life safety evaluation looks at three major areas: general safety, fire safety, and means of egress. 18 building parameters are evaluated, each affecting one of those three categories, or both, or all of them. Positive or negative points are assigned, and then again, there's a minimum score required to pass the evaluation. And various options can be examined to achieve the required number of points. Here are some of the 18 parameters on this sheet related to building construction. Relate to how tall the building is, whether the size of each floor, whether the building is divided into compartments by firewalls. It evaluates the walls separating the dwelling units to determine if a fire would be contained in the unit, a very important goal. Corridor walls are reviewed to determine if people can safely use the corridor during a fire in a unit. As mentioned earlier, the stairway and elevator shafts are reviewed to verify if a fire would likely be contained to a single floor. And what we call mixed occupancies, such as retail spaces and parking garage areas, are verified that they're properly separated so they don't threaten the residential parts of the building. The building is also reviewed to determine the locations of smoke detectors, whether and to what extent fire alarm and communication systems are provided, or automatic sprinkler may be provided. Also, the heating, air conditioning, and ventilation system is reviewed to determine it will not spread fire. We'll also look and see if the building has any special smoke control features, and how auxiliary uses, those parts of the building that are related but not specifically the same as the main use of the building, how those auxiliary uses are protected, similar in the way we do for mixed use. Next, the building's exits are reviewed to verify there is a proper number of exits, that they're of appropriate size and capacity, that they're located within the prescribed travel distance, that elevators are arranged to be recalled and used by the fire department, and that emergency lighting is provided to assure people can safely exit in the event of a power failure. After all the points are determined, they are included on a score sheet like this and evaluated to determine if they meet the minimum score in each of the three categories. This is an example of a completed score sheet. This building has failed, as you can see by looking at the total in the left-hand column. You'll also see two columns to the right, which are trials options to determine what are the potential things that can be changed to achieve the number of points. And again, the flexibility of this system is apparent here because one can look at what is feasible, how much things cost, and then determine the course of action. As I mentioned, we have developed a summary of findings from more than 220 building life safety evaluation surveys, and I thought it would be of interest to share with you some of the findings. Fewer than 10% of the buildings initially received a passing score. 5 landmark commercial buildings could not pass and were required to be sprinklered. It was interesting to note that 4 of those 5 were built before 1926, and 1 was built in 1965. Not surprising, a vast majority of the buildings, 85%, did not have voice systems. This is also an interesting slice of data showing when the 220 buildings were constructed. A large group in the period between 1920 and 29, and a second wave between 1960 and 69. No high-rise buildings were built between 1940 and 49 in the survey, attributed, of course, to World War II. It's also interesting to see that there is a correlation between building age and failing score, with the newer buildings having a greater chance of passing without any corrective measures being taken. We're also able to calculate the average score for the three major categories for each building type. These are the average initial scores for residential buildings in the sample we analyzed. It's not surprising that the average scores are low with respect to the required scores, because fewer than 1 in 10 of the buildings received that initial passing score. More interesting information, the frequency of deficiencies in both residential and commercial buildings is shown here. There is some commonality. For example, a large number of issues with fire doors, lack of communication systems, and penetrations of rated construction which could allow the passage of fire and smoke throughout the building. Again, I think this is very interesting information about the estimated costs to comply with the ordinance for both residential and commercial buildings and for each type of deficiency. We found that the average cost of compliance for a building was about $207,000, with commercial buildings being about 2 times the cost of a residential building. We also found that the cost of compliance in residential buildings worked out to be about $1,800 per unit. And you can see on the right, when there are deficiencies, the approximate cost of what it takes to remedy those deficiencies in residential and commercial occupancies. Some of the more typical deficiencies are noted here. This is a serious violation, locking of stairway doors from the stairway side, intended to provide some degree of security and requiring a key for people to get out of the stairway. This was one of the deficiencies which caused the fatalities at the Cook County building. People could not get out of the smoke-filled stairway and out onto another floor. This exit door has a deadbolt on it, as you can see where the arrow is pointing, and it also has a bicycle locked to the door hardware, which would make it extremely difficult to open the door and use as an exit. We found the next situation to be a situation that was not all that unusual. Non-rated, non-latching doors enclosing the stairway, offering no protection to people using the stairway as an exit and who may need to pass by this fire floor on their way out of the building. Here are 2 examples of discontinuous stairway enclosures. People need to leave the stairway and be exposed to smoke and flames on the fire floor on their way out. Moreover, the open stairways are ready avenues for vertical spread of fire to the upper floors, trapping people above the fire floor. Frankly, these are the kinds of buildings that the life safety evaluation was intending to find and fix, so as to greatly reduce the exposure to the public from dangerous buildings, which up to now had not been identified so vividly. This is an example of an excessive dead-end corridor, a corridor that allows travel only in one direction, which increases the risk to people who are forced to use only one route to reach an exit. Such conditions are normally limited, so people have access to 2 exit routes. The arrow in this photograph is pointing to an opening around the pipe which serves a scissor stairway, sometimes known as an interlocking stairway. 2 stairways in the same shaft. This is important because if one stairway fills with smoke, the other stairway could also be contaminated, voiding the only 2 exits for people on the upper floors of a building. Penetrations in such stairways must be airtight. Here are 2 cases of unprotected penetrations of stairway walls, one with some piping and one with a duct. In each case, the integrity of the exit stairway has been compromised and must be restored. This is an example of another very dangerous situation. The stairway on the left was found open into the building storage area shown in the picture on the right. This exposes the stairway enclosure to a serious fire and renders it useless to the occupants above. It also serves as an avenue for vertical fire spread throughout the building. Here are 2 cases of corridor separations which have been compromised. The photo on the left shows a transom opening onto an exit access corridor. The door in the photo on the right is a rated door. You might even be able to see that label on the hinge side of the door. but it could be left open because it lacks a self-closing device. If somebody left the unit in a hurry during a fire, it could cause the corridor and the people using it to be subject to the flame and smoke coming from that unit. So what's next? First, the Commissioner of Buildings has clearly stated that there will not be any further extensions of compliance dates. In fact, we know, and some of you may know all too well, that the city has begun enforcement through inspections. Over the last 3 months, we received a number of calls from clients about their buildings being cited for deficiencies, and they've received citations for court appearances. In discussion with city officials, I have learned that the city no longer wishes to negotiate with owners on an informal basis. They believe the best and most consistent way to enforce the ordinance is to take violators to court. The city has a number of designated people with this program. One such person is David Naiman. If anybody would like that contact information, you can shoot me a note and I will send you their contact information. And I've been told also that the goal of the program is compliance, not the fines, which could range between $300 and $500 per day. It's common sense that if you show indifference to the ordinance in court, you'd likely draw some fines. That hasn't happened yet, but it's probably more likely to be in the future. We've also learned that the inspections are not just limited to the items in the life safety evaluation. We've been contacted by at least 3 clients who have been cited for having wood roof decks on the roofs of their buildings. In each case, the deck has been installed for many years. The decks were not cited in the life safety evaluation report as violations for various reasons. But it is correct that having a wood roof deck is a violation of the Chicago Building Code. Most high-rise buildings are of fire-resistive, non-combustible construction, what the code calls Type 1 construction. Type 1 construction does not permit wood above the membrane of the roof. So this needs to be corrected, and we're developing alternative solutions for our clients. We also learned that the city will allow the use of epay wood, a high-density hardwood, decay-resistant, which is also very difficult to ignite, but it's also very expensive, being imported from Central and South America. 2 other clients have been cited for having inadequate exits from roof-level decks where more than 50 people can congregate. Well, that's only about 750 square feet in terms of deck area. I'm working on a solution for those clients right now. We've developed a few scenarios to address the situation you may be in at the moment. Here's one, and interestingly, I actually received a call yesterday from a property manager who has been cited for not having a completed life safety evaluation. I won't get into the details here, but the client has been cited to appear in court next week. So we've advised the client, number one, of course, the deadline has long passed. They should arrange to have a survey completed by a licensed architect or engineer as soon as possible. They should develop an accelerated time frame for repairs, and they should open communications with the Chicago Department of Buildings on their plan. Another situation you may be in. A number of building owners and managers find themselves in this position. My report was accepted and my upgrades are completed. Well, great. You should prepare for an inspection by the Department of Buildings. But remember, the Department of Building inspection is not limited only to life safety evaluation issues, as we've recently found out. We recommend and remind you that your facility should be in good condition for a general inspection. Make sure your exits are not locked or blocked. Some of the fundamentals, that your systems are maintained. This is another condition which the Chicago Tribune recently reported applies to hundreds of buildings. My report was accepted, but my upgrades aren't finished. Well, our advice, continue to complete the upgrades as soon as you can. If taken to court, you should be prepared for a court appearance. Prior to court, you'll likely receive another inspection so the city can provide the court with updated information. You may also wish to have your architect or engineer with you in case you need to address any technicalities and the realities of your building which may affect the schedule. It's also recommended you have an attorney with you. We also advise you'll be in a much better position with the court if you can demonstrate that the minor items have been completed. We've also been telling clients for years not to wait to the end of the compliance period because we expect competent contractors to be busy at the end of the period, and of course when demand exceeds supply, prices rise, so the sooner the better in completing the repairs. Finally, we have several clients with this situation. My report was accepted, my upgrades are complete, but now I have new deficiencies and have been given a court date. Well, first determine if the citation is related to a life safety evaluation violation or if it's another deficiency. We've been told that building deficiencies other than those in Chapter 34, which again has the minimum requirements for existing buildings, we've been told that those deficiencies may be able to be reconciled through a life safety evaluation if all of the deficiencies are properly scored. We've not been through the scenario ourselves yet, but we soon will be. Again, it's important to be prepared and not ignore the citations. Have a plan for compliance, including completion dates. With that, I've concluded the presentation, and we're now able to take your questions. Thanks for your attention, and thank you in advance for your questions. I'll turn this back over to Liz.
Thank you, Carl. As a reminder, if you have a question, please maximize the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Type your question in the questions for staff box and hit send. Let's see if we have any questions so far. Yes, we do. Okay. First question. I have been cited for deficiencies which were not addressed in the life safety evaluation report. How do I deal with those items?
Yeah, we just mentioned that. The city has the authority to identify building deficiencies which are not connected with the life safety evaluation. Any deficiencies in Chapter 34 for existing buildings must be addressed. And again, the life safety evaluation was not intended to waive those minimum requirements of the code. Again, the city has told me that if the deficiencies are appropriately scored in the life safety evaluation, it's possible that the offsetting features of the building can compensate for that negative feature, and something we can talk about with the city. It needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis.
All right, we have another question. Is it 100% necessary to install a door on the laundry room, as we were advised by police some time ago that we should not have a door on the room, as it could pose danger to someone in the room, being shut in by an intruder? Also, can it be propped open at any time of the day to allow for air to circulate as the room gets very hot?
Well, the second part of that question first. The door can be held open with a magnetic hold-open device connected to your building's fire alarm system, and it would only close when the fire alarm system activates. If it's a rated separation, the door needs to be there. Without knowing the building, you need to first determine if it's a rated separation. It may be considered an auxiliary use, in which case it can be waived by the Commissioner of Buildings, depending on the size of that room and its relationship to other parts, other occupancies on that floor. So it's sort of a maybe.
Okay. This is a question about compartmentation. What is the minimum square footage of the area that would require compartmentation?
Well, compartmentation is required for new construction, not existing buildings. The Chicago Building Code still maintains a compartmentation option for new buildings in lieu of sprinklers, but to my knowledge, there's hardly anybody using that option because of the flexibility and the marketability of sprinklered buildings today. I don't know the compartment size right off the top of my head, but perhaps I can look it up here while we're looking at some other questions.
Yes, and that's a good point to address right now before we get to some of our other questions, is that we will be sending out a follow-up email, and Carl will get to any questions that have not been able to get answered by the end of today's presentation. So if you don't hear your question read, don't worry, he will get back to you. All right, the next question is, I have an open stairwell from the 27th floor to the first floor. There are pipes that travel through those stairwells from 27 to 1 and light openings around those pipes. Since the stairwell is completely open, do those holes around the pipes need to be closed up?
Well, I don't know, it depends. If the open stairway from the 27th floor to the first floor, that sounds like a situation that needs some serious analysis, because that's not normally allowable. I don't know if it's a required exit stairway or not, but if it is, that could be an issue that needs to be addressed. Certainly if the stairway is open, you don't need to seal the openings around the pipes, but I question the premise that the open stairway is allowed in the first place. I did find the answer about the compartmentation. It's 30,000 square feet per floor. It's a big number, but again, that was intended to be used for new construction.
Okay. Where do I find out if we have an LSE report on file with the city?
Well, there is a website the city has that shows the status of life safety evaluation reports, which you can look up any building by address and determine if there is a report already on file.
Okay. If we are fully sprinklered, we're not subject to the life safety evaluation. But how is the city handling fire panels installed before the ordinance took effect?
As far as I know, they're acceptable, but all buildings, sprinkled or not, need a one-way voice system, which should have been completed by January 1st. So that remains true for all buildings, sprinkled or not. The city has I mentioned earlier that there are some specific exceptions that allow existing systems to be used, such that are unconventional systems that are not the typical red panels you'll find in a lobby of a building, but other means are acceptable, but it's a very limited list of conditions that allows it to be accepted.
Okay. Have any residential buildings appeared yet in court, and if so, were any fines assessed?
I don't know the answer, but I would guess yes, because of what we're hearing and seeing with our clients. I don't know the answer about fines being assessed.
Okay. We were inspected in November, but haven't received a report, except we know we failed through the portal. Building violations are cited on the City of Chicago site related to conservation inspection done the same day. Are we supposed to assume violations are the same?
No, I don't think so. I think you should get a separate report with building violations if you haven't seen them already. Again, if you'd like, you could get in contact with me and I could take a look at your report and make that determination, but it doesn't sound like you should expect to see the same, all the deficiencies on the same report.
Okay. What is the best way or company to come out and determine if existing fire doors are compliant, if not obviously tagged by Underwriters Laboratories?
Well, Underwriters Laboratories can provide a field certification. There's also another organization called Intertech, which is a competitor with Underwriters Laboratories. They could possibly do the same, and they would look at the door and determine if it is built like a labeled fire door. They can provide a letter that says we certify this is equivalent. I also have been involved in cases where, extreme cases where the building has taken a door off the hinges and sent it to Underwriters Laboratories to actually be tested in their laboratory under fire conditions to verify that it will do the job, and then the city would accept that data as equivalent to a complying door. That, of course, takes money, and you need to replace the door. It won't be usable after that.
Okay. How do you know how many points you need to pass the life safety evaluation?
That's in the ordinance. again, there's a different scoring system for commercial buildings and residential buildings, and the points required in each of those three categories for each of those two types of buildings is in the ordinance itself. That's in Chapter 34.
Okay. Are those field door inspections more expensive, or should we just replace doors?
Depends how many doors you have. If you have 150 doors, perhaps the test is worth doing. The field investigation is worth doing. And I want to differentiate field investigation from a test, because the field investigation is simply an engineer from one of the laboratories going out and looking at it and writing a report, not necessarily taking it off the hinges and sending it to a fire test.
Okay. We were inspected in November, but we're just told that the report and notes from our inspection have been lost. So we don't know what, if any, issues we have. We know that we had to install closures on some doors and get some doors tested and labeled. Can we be fined because they lost our report?
Well, I'm not an attorney. That sounds like a legal question, but it seems to me that you have not been given notice of your deficiencies, and it would make sense that you should not be able to be held to that if you haven't been given a written report.
Okay. Doesn't UL report their findings to the City of Chicago?
No, they report their findings to the client. That's how it works. And if you have an agreement, if a building owner has a contract with UL, in fact, UL does many private tests for clients that will not be released to the public. So it's their obligation. If you have a private test, it should remain that way.
Okay, the same questioner from before said UL told us they had to report it, and they did.
Well, okay. I can't address that.
Okay. Our building was built in 1980 without sprinklers. Are we still required to upgrade for the life safety evaluation?
Probably not. I believe the ordinance says buildings prior to 1975. So apparently if your building doesn't have sprinklers and it was built in 1980, you are one of those buildings, one of the few buildings that has apparently taken the compartmentation option. So you have all the modern features even though you don't have sprinklers.
Okay, our life safety report was prepared in 2005 by an architectural company that is no longer in business. The city inspection report says I have violations. What can I do now?
If the issues relate to items in the report, you'll need to retain another architect or engineer who is experienced in conducting life safety evaluation surveys. If the issues are related to other deficiencies, you could retain a consulting engineer or architect familiar with the Chicago Building Code.
Okay, thank you very much, Carl. And if you had any additional questions that weren't addressed in today's question portion, Carl will contact you and hopefully help you out. So thank you very much.